Welcome to the Walrus Talks Innovation Nation, presented by Universities Canada. I'm Jennifer Ollett. I am the Executive Director of the Walrus, and I'm your host for this evening. We're thrilled to be here in person in Ottawa at the Canadian Museum of Nature, as well as streaming live online at thewalrus.ca. Hello and welcome to the over 600 households who registered for the live stream. We have audience members tuning in from all over Canada. This includes Montreal, Red Deer, Guelph, Victoria, Windsor, and Niagara Falls. And I'd also like to welcome folks who are watching around the world. We have people registered from New York, Madrid, Seattle, and London. A round of applause for our audience in person and online this evening. For those of you at the museum, some notes. Smoking and vaping is strictly forbidden at the museum. In case of a fire alarm, there will be an intercom that comes on. Please listen to the announcement and follow those instructions. And washrooms are the entrance where you came in on the 4th floor. We encourage you all to share this conversation on social media, whether you take a picture here or watching it on a computer or tablet at home. If there's a quote or highlights you'd like to share, tag us at the Walrus. Our hashtag is Walrus Talks. Hashtag is also a great way to connect to our two audiences in person and at home. I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional unceded Anishinaabe Algonquin territory in Canada's capital city. Ottawa is home today to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, and we are honored to carry on a tradition of storytelling at the Walrus, working with Indigenous journalists, artists, and talkers. We encourage you to take a moment to reflect on the land that you're on, wherever you're joining us from. A bit more about the Walrus. The Walrus is Canada's conversation. We cover stories across Canada to offer a deeper understanding on who we are for those inside and outside the country. This year, from tariffs to taunts of becoming the 51st state to tariffs again, Canada is the conversation, and the country is standing strong. At the Walrus, we're responding to this moment with facts, analysis, and even some humor, as is the Canadian way. You can find our work online at thewalrus.ca, in print on newsstands, or by subscribing to the print edition of the Walrus. You can also listen to our podcasts and listen to our stories online, or take part in events like this one. This work is independent, and it's powered by our community of donors, supporters, and partners. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to Universities Canada for partnering with us on this event this evening. To tell us more, please welcome to the stage Koko, Bate, Agborsangaya, Director of Partnerships and Programs with Universities Canada.
Thank you. Anine, good evening everyone. Bonsoir à tous. Que vous nous rejoigniez ici au magnifique Musée canadien de la nature ou en ligne de partout au pays, bienvenue au Walrus Talks Innovation Nation. Donc avant de commencer, j'aimerais reconnaître que nous sommes réunis sur la territoire traditionnelle non cédée du peuple algonquin Anishinaabe, dont la présence ici remonte à des temps immémoriaux. Nous reconnaissons et respectons leur lien profond avec cette terre et les remercions de la partager avec nous. My name is Koko Agborsangaya. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Programs at Universities Canada. On behalf of myself and my small yet mighty team, and our partners at the Walrus, thank you for being here tonight. Now, let me tell you why we're really here. I have two very different challenges when I try to explain what I do. The first is with my mom, who just turned 82 years old. When I tell her that I work in research, excellence, and global partnerships, she smiles politely and asks, "Do you want more plantains?" Yes. I also have a teenager situation. And when I explained that I help showcase Canadian researchers who are changing the world, when she actually makes eye contact, she says, "Cool, bro." Que ce soit ma mère ou mes enfants, ce que nous célébrons ce soir devrait importer à tout le monde. Parce que l'innovation qui émerge des universités canadiennes n'est pas abstraite. Elle ne se passe pas dans une tour d'ivoire lointaine. Elle est dans le traitement médical qui a sauvé la vie de votre voisin. Elle est dans l'application qui facilite votre travail. Elle est dans la technologie propre qui réduit notre empreinte carbone. C'est la raison pour laquelle votre téléphone fonctionne, vos lumières restent allumées et votre avenir semble plus prometteur. Ce soir, il s'agit de l'innovation visible. À travers l'initiative d'excellence mondiale de l'Université Canada, nous travaillons à reconnaître et célébrer l'excellence de la recherche canadienne sur la scène mondiale. Nous soutenons nos chercheurs alors qu'ils concourent pour les prix internationaux prestigieux. Nous réunissons des partenaires pour renforcer l'écosystème d'innovation du Canada. Et ce soir, nous faisons ce que nous croyons être le plus important, montrer aux Canadiens le talent extraordinaire que nous avons ici, même chez nous. Because here's what we know. Canada has always been a nation of innovators. We've always been ahead of the cutting edge. From insulin to the pacemaker, GLP-1 to artificial intelligence. But too often, we're polite, we're modest, we're Canadian. Too often, we let the world celebrate our discoveries while we stay quiet. Mais pas ce soir. Ce soir, nous sommes bruyantes, nous sommes fiers. Ce soir, nous allons entendre directement les chercheurs innovateurs qui définissent l'avenir du Canada et franchement, l'avenir du monde. So prepare to be inspired. You're going to hear from about life-saving breakthroughs, bold climate solutions. I won't spoil it for you. All developed right here in Canada. You're going to meet people turning visionary ideas into real-world impacts. And you're going to see why Canadian research doesn't just belong on the world stage, it's leading it. Au nom de l'Université du Canada, au nom de l'Université Canada et du Walrus, merci d'être ici. Merci de célébrer l'excellence canadienne. Et merci de croire comme nous que l'innovation ne concerne pas seulement les idées, elle concerne l'impact. So now let's get started. Welcome to the Walrus Talks Innovation Nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Koko. Tonight we have 7 speakers with 7 minutes each to share some of the transformative research emerging from Canadian universities that is creating real-world impact and how Canadian research is defining tomorrow's possibilities. Coming up, we'll be hearing from some pretty big brains. Dr. Graham Carr, President and Vice-Chancellor, Concordia University, where I went to university and did my undergrad. Dr. Catalina Lopez-Correa, Chief Global Strategy Officer, Genome Canada. Rahul Krishnan, Assistant Professor, Department of Computer Science, University of Toronto, Canada CIFAR, Artificial Intelligence Chair. Dr. André Blais, Emeritus Professor, Department of Political Science at the Université de Montreal. Dr. Kyle Bobiwash, Assistant Professor and Indigenous Scholar, Department of Entomology at University of Manitoba, and I did ask him about bugs in the green room. Dr. Gina Ogilvie, Professor in Canada Research Chair, Faculty of Medicine, Associate Director, Women's Health Research Institute, University of British Columbia. And Dr. Sarah Burch, Executive Director, Waterloo Climate Institute, Professor, Geography and Environmental Management, Canada Research Chair. Thank you all for joining us.
Good evening, bonsoir. I'm Graham Carr, the President and Vice-Chancellor of Concordia University, and I'm also the Chair of the University's Canada Research Committee. Thank you to the Walrus, thank you to Universities Canada for the invitation. It's really an honor to kick off tonight's event. Now, around 4:30 every afternoon, the jackhammering starts in the building where my office is located. The work is in the basement, but you can feel it all the way up to my office on the 8th floor. And it continues well into the evening. When I say goodbye to the after-hours security guard, I always make sure he sees me because, of course, he's wearing earplugs. The construction stems from an R&D project called Planet Zero that aims to decarbonize the physical infrastructure of our campuses and achieve carbon neutrality by 2040. At Concordia, the #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions is heating and cooling our buildings, and we're not alone. In Canada, buildings generate 18% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And what's more, 70% of the buildings standing today will still be in use in 2050. While governments understandably emphasize energy requirements for new construction, the cold, hard reality is that decarbonizing existing infrastructure is mission critical for fighting climate change. The problem is that decarbonizing what already exists is far more complicated than building new structures. Now, like many universities, Concordia made an institutional commitment to climate action a few years ago. And we knew from the off that our buildings would have to be the starting point. But we also understood traditional renovation strategies just weren't going to cut it. Concordia has 2 campuses. One is a storefront campus in the heart of downtown Montreal, and the other is a campus in a residential neighborhood 7 kilometers to the west. Our footprint covers 80 buildings ranging from heritage sites and 20th century office towers to sports facilities and LEED standard pavilions. All told, our physical plant spans 150 years of Montreal's built environment. Planet Zero started with 3 principles. First, we would be true to our mission as an anchor institution, serving our city through teaching, research, and training. Second, we would seek out external partners invested in the green energy transformation who would be all in on collaborating to do innovative R&D at scale. And finally, we would convert our campuses into living labs where our industry partners, together with Concordia researchers, students, and facilities managers, could work to design feasible pathways to decarbonization. When we decided to launch phase 1 of the downtown project in the building that houses my office, the choice was partly about leading by example. But we also chose the building because it's a microcosm of university activities. It's home to classrooms, offices, a clinic, restaurants, and retail spaces, plus it connects into one of the city's busiest metro stations. That mixed use and direct physical integration into the city's infrastructure make it a great test bed. After a rigorous process, we chose Johnson Controls, a global leader in intelligent building systems, as our partner downtown. While all the activities carry on in the building, Johnson Controls, working with our students, faculty, and staff, will test theories and new technologies in real time and real-world conditions. Through a deep retrofit, our goal is to cut the building's energy use by 50% in 2 years by improving heating, cooling, lighting, and ventilation. Then the results will be monitored for the next 10 years as we work with Johnson Controls to decarbonize our other buildings downtown. Meanwhile, at our West Campus, we partnered with two industry powerhouses, literally. Hydro-Quebec, one of the world's most successful public utilities, and Énergie, the province's main natural gas distributor. With its quads, green spaces, and low-rise buildings, the West Campus is a different game entirely. There, the goal is to create an integrated district heating and cooling system linking the ensemble of our buildings. In our boldest vision, the project will offset peak consumer demand in the surrounding neighborhood, which includes a mega hospital and schools, in addition to residential housing. So what's in it for our industry partners? The chance to collaborate with each other, but also with the university, and to do co-innovation at scale. Beyond access to our land and our buildings, they strengthen their talent pipeline by getting to know our students. And they can also work with Concordia's globally recognized experts in smart building engineering, resilient next-gen cities, electrification, cybersecurity, and applied AI. And as for us, it's the chance to do R&D together with major industry partners, but also to co-design curricula and competency-based training for the green energy workforce of tomorrow. Ideally, the R&D we do together will incubate startups, generate IP with commercial potential, and become a reference point for decarbonization projects elsewhere. Beyond engineering, we want to bring in financial institutions looking to model new investment strategies for scale energy transformation. And for sure, we have to engage municipal officials and policymakers who can facilitate regulatory change and the development of industry standards. The Prime Minister talks about making Canada an energy powerhouse. Planet Zero aligns with that goal by aiming to develop and deploy behavior, expertise, and technologies that dramatically reduce energy consumption in urban areas. In practical terms, it's about finding sustainable solutions to cut institutional costs, increase industry profits, advance research, and innovate teaching and training. If Canada is going to be an innovation nation, we need ambitious projects that pull industry, government, and university partners together. Climate change is one of the grand challenges of our time, and there are unique opportunities for Canada. To be leaders in the future, we have to start somewhere. Apparently, for another week or two, that's right below my office. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Catalina Lopez-Correa. I am Chief Global Strategy Officer at Genome Canada, and it's a real honor for me to be here. Tonight, I will talk about the power of genomics and how this technology is reshaping the future of our health in ways that are both global and deeply personal. Thank you. When the pandemic hit in 2020, my days and my nights were quickly became filled with genomes. As Executive Director of the Canadian COVID-19 Genomics Network, or CancoGen, I was coordinating a $40 million investment from the federal government to support scientists, labs, public health agencies across the country as we work to sequence the virus that had completely changed all our lives. And suddenly, genomics wasn't something hidden inside high-tech labs. It became part of our everyday language. In living rooms across Canada, people were talking about Alpha, Delta, Omicron, remember? Variants we could identify only because scientists had read and compared the SARS-CoV-2 virus's RNA code. Across Canada, our teams were sequencing tens of thousands of viral genomes to understand how COVID-19 was spreading, how the virus was mutating, and most importantly, how we could stop it or at least mitigate its impact. Sometimes it felt surreal. I would join Zoom calls late at night, with colleagues from Vancouver, from Halifax, from Montreal, from Ottawa, all over Canada. And we will discuss the latest variants identified just hours earlier, assessing its national and international impact in real time. Genomics had moved from the lab to the bench, from the lab bench into the news cycle, into the TV, into newspapers, into our living rooms, into our homes. It became part of the social fabric of the pandemic. But that rapid response didn't emerge overnight. It was possible because Canada had spent more than 2 decades investing in genomics research, building capacity, training experts, generating knowledge. Brilliant scientists across the country had been working quietly for years on the foundations of what we and the world now recognize as the genomic revolution. Our efforts during the pandemic went far beyond sequencing 450,000 viral genomes and 10,000 human genomes. They helped decode the pandemic in real time and contributed directly to the tools that changed its course. When we watch almost in disbelief, as highly effective vaccines were developed and validated in less than 1 year, it wasn't pure luck. It was the result of many years of research into RNA biology, immune responses, genetic engineering, research done not only in the United States and Europe, but also here in Canada. And there is a little part of that story that people still don't know. Many people still don't know. Canada played a critical role in developing the lipid nanoparticles, these tiny fat droplets that safely deliver the mRNA molecules into our cells. Without them, mRNA vaccines would simply fall apart before they can reach their targets. Those nanoparticles, developed in part by Canadian scientists, were the vehicle that turned genomics into world-changing vaccines. So when the world seemed paralyzed, science moved, and it moved very, very fast, because information encoded in a virus's genome could be transformed into widely distributed tests, public health decisions, policy decisions, and life-saving vaccines. So for me, genomics has always been about connections between people, between data, between science and humanity. But I actually never imagined that connection will one day become deeply personal. So 2 years after coordinating Canadian national pandemic genomics response, I found myself sitting in a doctor's office, hearing the words no one ever wants to hear. You have breast cancer. Suddenly, I was on the other side of the genomic story, not as a scientist managing national sequencing programs, but as a patient waiting for my own genomic test results. And this time, the genome being analyzed wasn't from a virus. It was my own tumor genome. I understood in a visceral way what it means to wait for data that could determine your future, my future. Genomics was no longer an abstract technology. It was guiding decisions about my treatment, whether chemotherapy would work, whether targeted therapies was an option, whether mutations in my tumor meant a better or a worse prognosis. Here again, I witnessed the true power of genomic science, the capacity to move from fear and questions to clarity and understanding, from a one-size-fits-all approach to a truly precise and personalized medicine. I was privileged to have access to several genomic tests, but I kept thinking about women in remote and rural regions, in Indigenous communities in Canada, and in low and middle income countries. Will they have access to these genomic tests? Will they have access to these advances in precision health? Cancer treatment is changing today because of genomics. We no longer treat all breast cancers in the same way. we analyze the DNA, we analyze the RNA of each of those tumors. We look for mutations, we look for the molecular profile to define the treatment. My own treatment was shaped by my genomic information, and it gave me not only the right therapy, but something just as vital, a renewed sense of confidence and hope. We are entering on an era where healthcare is profoundly personal, where our diagnosis, our treatment, and even our ability to prevent diseases can be guided by our own genetic blueprint. But this information and this transformation doesn't happen in isolation. It requires collaboration. Scientists, clinicians, governments, and patients all working together just as we did during the pandemic. That same spirit of solidarity, data sharing, determination is what we need now to make precision medicine accessible to everyone, to ensure genomic innovation serves not just the privileged few, but all patients in every community across our country and across the world. Innovation is not just about technology. It is about connection, it's about empathy, it's about compassion, it's about the courage to imagine together something better. So whether we are decoding a global pandemic or decoding a tumor, the power of genomics reminds us of a simple truth. We are all connected by our DNA, by our biology, by our humanity, and by our shared future. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rahul Krishnan. I'm an assistant professor in computer science and medicine at the University of Toronto. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we should do with AI. So I want to thank the Walrus as well as Universities Canada for inviting me to this event. So my day job involves quite a lot of teaching, and I kind of describe it as follows. I teach humans how to build AI, and I teach AI how to think a little bit more like a human. So AI might evoke, quite a few strong reactions here. It might evoke reactions of hype, fear, confusion, excitement. So instead of asking the question what AI might do to us, tonight I thought I could ask, what should we do with AI? So I'm going to tell you about three things. I'm first going to tell you a story about how past technologies have changed societies. I'll tell you about how we arrived at today's AI systems and a little bit about what I do. And third, I'll tell you about what we should do next, or where we should go from here. So let's think back to ancient times, where a merchant might be tallying a shipment. And to do this, they might resort to hiring someone, a scribe, or using tally sticks to try and figure out the size of the shipment. Now, this process was slow, prone to errors, and was limited to small shipments. And then, across time in civilizations around the world, there was a simple invention, the abacus. So this thing was just a couple of rods and beads, but this invention changed quite a lot. It enabled us to externalize working memory, making arithmetic fast, repeatable, and error-resistant for everyone. The consequence of this invention was that it enabled larger-scale commerce and new avenues for individuals to participate in trade when they otherwise might not have been able to. And just as the abacus transformed how we handle numbers, modern AI systems represent another shift today in how we think about information. So I want to zoom forward in time now to 2010. And at that point in time, there was a competition called the ImageNet competition, because scientists wanted to figure out, can we teach a computer to recognize objects from images? And this was a really hard problem back then. I know it doesn't seem that way right now, but to tackle this problem, we threw everything we had at it. We spent a lot of time designing custom algorithms that tried to mimic how a human might solve this problem in order to detect an object from an image. And it turns out that this was not quite the right direction at all. The approach that ended up working was pioneered by Jeff Hinton at the University of Toronto, was instead to let a program figure out the algorithm from data, which is come up with an algorithm on its own as to mapping from images onto its objects. So this competition was won by Jeff Hinton in a landslide, and it kicked off what we know today as the deep learning revolution. Fast forward another decade or so, there was a small startup in 2020 by the name of OpenAI that ran a similar experiment. They took all of the text data they could find on the internet and said, what if we trained a very, very large neural network to predict the next word in a sentence given all the other words? That was the genesis of what we know today as large language models. So these LLMs, and I'll use them interchangeably with the word AI, were created at that time. And in many ways, for those of you who've used ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, you've seen the sort of power that they have in terms of answering general purpose questions, not just with text, but with images, sound, videos. They truly are general purpose technology. But the same model that can sort of write a haiku about me being stranded in London due to an airline strike is also just unable to tell me how many collisions there were in a billiards table. That's weird. Why is that? But that is a simple enough question for any human to look at a video and figure out. Well, it turns out the mechanisms that these models use in order to make predictions are vastly different from how humans learn. So while we've let these models learn on lots and lots of data, the kind of learning that they've achieved is very different from our own. So if you or I walk into the kitchen and see a pool of water on the floor, we might think to say, oh, maybe the fridge is leaking. Maybe the dog knocked over a bowl of water. But LLMs might say, well, maybe there's a mop nearby and the floor was recently mopped. Why is that? Well, in the text data that it was trained on, often the word wet floor was closely correlated in space with mops. So it turns to that as a potential cause. And so in short, today's AI programs are excellent at spotting patterns, but they're really terrible at understanding why things happen. And this is the fundamental challenge that my group and I are working on. So we've recently developed a new kind of neural network called causal PFNs. And like many models before, this model leverages a large amount of compute. But this model learns to tease apart association from causation using millions and millions of simulated examples. And the really cool part is that it actually works on real data that it's never seen before. And so we're really excited to see how this opens up new doors for AI system to tease apart cause and effect. We're actively studying how well such models can assist oncologists in prescribing chemotherapy after surgery for cancer. We're looking at whether this model can assist in predicting the effect of genetic perturbations, as well as figuring out if we can teach robots a little bit about cause and effect too. But as with all journeys like this, and I'm confident this kind of technology will eventually make its way with LLMs, I think it's really important to step back and ask where we're going. Which brings me to the final question that I'll highlight tonight. What choices should we, and when I say we, I mean really as a society, make as these systems get more and more powerful with time? My contention is that first, we should start becoming comfortable with change. So in the Industrial Revolution, we mechanized physical labor. In the coming years, I think we're going to see an increasing amount of digitization of cognitive labor. But if you've read any history book, the transitions during the Industrial Revolution were not smooth. And I think this is the reason why we have to proactively have these conversations. Second, we have to think about the kind of society we want when accurate knowledge is cheaply available, because that's where the world is headed. In medicine, we need to think about how we build AI-assisted healthcare systems. But not just building that system, thinking about how it ensures an improvement to our status quo, values patient outcomes, as well as equity of care. In education, scientific inquiry, business, manufacturing, we need to create the North Star that we want to move towards. And to borrow a phrase from hockey, skate to where the puck is going to be. Third, I think the biggest wins from AI are actually going to come from its dissemination throughout society. Just like the abacus, with every individual having access to this and using it as a cognitive scaffold, that's really when we'll understand its limits, as well as how far we can go with this technology. So AI is, to me, just a tool, just as the abacus once was. If we engage early and ensure that everyone benefits from this technology, I'm confident that we can expand human potential. And to me, the future is honestly not just about AI or how it evolves. It's really about us, the people and societies that we turn into through the process of this evolution. And so hopefully, in 100 years from now, someone like me will say in a room like this that we made some of the right choices. Thank you.
Good evening. I am André, a political science scientist at the University of Montreal. Tonight I'm going to talk about voting systems, but also, and most importantly, about the need to innovate with regard to the way we vote and the way votes are counted. If you believe in democracy, you will agree that having free and fair elections is absolutely fundamental. You will also agree, I hope, that we need to reflect on how we vote and how these votes are counted. That is our voting system. The voting system that we have in Canada is first past the post. We vote for one candidate, and the candidate with most votes wins. This is the way we vote everywhere in Canada, at all levels, federal, provincial, municipal. This is also how we voted at the beginning of Confederation. In the past, there have been a few short-lived experiments with alternative systems in BC, Alberta, and Manitoba, but this was a long time ago. The bottom line is we vote the same way we voted more than 100 years ago. So no innovation here, no innovation. It's clear. But there has been a very interesting innovation in the process of electoral reform. In BC in 2003 and in Ontario in 2006, the provincial government established a citizen assembly with a mandate to propose what would be the best electoral system for the province. The members of the assembly, there were about 100 of them in Ontario and 160 in BC, were randomly selected through a lottery. They were lucky losers as well. These citizens learned about different voting systems. They consulted, they deliberated, and they proposed a new system. In British Columbia, they proposed a single transferable vote, and in Ontario, they proposed a mixed-member proportional representation. In each case, they were held by a research team, which played a major role in the learning process. The assembly members were informed about the different types of electoral systems, what we know and don't know about their potential consequences, their advantages and disadvantages. In the end, both assemblies recommended innovation, a new electoral system. Both proposals were turned down in a referendum. Why were these proposals for change turned down? There are many, many reasons. I just want to mention one. Assembly members were exposed to research while the public wasn't. Partly because the assembly members were more open to change than most citizens. I think there was more, interest in innovation. In this instance, like in many other situations, exposure to research facilitates openness to innovation. Where do we go from here? Dozens of different voting systems exist around the world. I find it very hard to believe that a system that was adopted more than a century ago in a completely different context is the best option for Canada, for every province, and for every municipality. There are compelling reasons to experiment with other ways of voting and counting votes. But there have been many attempts at electoral reform recently in many provinces as well as the federal level, and they have all failed. Are there lessons to be drawn about how innovation could occur? I think so. The first lesson is that electoral reform could or should occur at the municipal level. Take Ontario. The province allows municipalities that wish so to implement internet voting for their local elections. About half the municipalities in Ontario do so. Research is being conducted about the consequences of internet voting, most especially whether it increases turnout or not. This is the way to go. Let's experiment. We could do the same with voting systems. Let's try proportional representation in a few municipalities, and let's look at how it works. This is how electoral reform is proceeding in the US. The main innovation there is ranked choice. Voters rank the candidates. If there are 4 candidates, they indicate their first, second, third, and fourth choice. Ranked choice is used now in about 50 American cities, most especially New York, Minneapolis, and San Francisco. There are debates about its merits and limits. There are referenda, with reforms sometimes winning, sometimes losing. Provincial governments should encourage municipalities that wish to do so to innovate, to experiment new voting systems. And the municipalities should request from their provincial government the right and the opportunity to experiment new ways of voting. The other lesson I draw concerns the type of electoral system. In Canada, reform advocates have argued in favor of proportional representation, that is a system where parties' seat share corresponds to their vote share. The focus has been on how votes are counted. There has been much less discussion about how people cast their vote. Right now, people vote for one single candidate. Another option is that they vote for all the candidates that they like or approve, which is called approval voting. Or they can rank them from the first choice to their last choice. Or they could give each candidate a score of +1, 0, or -1. There are dozens of ways for voters to express their views about the candidates and the parties. The existing system provides very poor and limited information about voters' preferences. As a voter, I'm not allowed to indicate that I would like to support not one candidate, but 3 or 4 of them. I'm not allowed to identify which candidates I find completely unacceptable. Many alternative systems provide much richer information than the existing first past the post. Governments are keen to foster innovation. We need to foster innovation in the very infrastructure of our democracy. Why not innovate in the very basics of our election, that is, how we cast our votes? Thank you for your attention.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Bobiwash. I'm an assistant professor in entomology and the Indigenous scholar for the Faculty of Agricultural and Food Sciences at the University of Manitoba. I initially balked at coming to this, right? I'm an entomologist, right? Most of my work involves chasing bees on farms, in ditches, and a lot of the innovation that I do, sometimes results in what's the best toothbrush to mimic a bumblebee pollinating a blueberry flower. And but I love criticizing. Oh, I love criticizing institutions. So I'll come along and participate here. And I think it's important to think about life sucks, right? We're in a climate crisis. We're probably in a biodiversity crisis, probably in an economic crisis of some sort. Wealth inequality is at the highest it's ever been in a long time. Trust in science is low, right? Streaming services are through the roof in terms of subscription. Right? But we know universities innovate, right? We like to think that as researchers, we're doing some sort of public good. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I think something, though, that we forget to highlight is the fact that universities do more than just innovate through commercializing research, providing new tools to support civic functions, or even reconnect humanity with relationships with nature. Universities should be seen as this nexus for translating knowledge into tangible benefits that society sees, encompassing all sorts of metrics, right? We can think of economic metrics, whether they are market economics or human economics. But there are also places where we can actually question the system in which we innovate, right? And I think that's what universities have historically done really well. And we have to make sure that we think about innovation in that sense. And it's this broader conceptualization that it's this broader conceptualization of universities as these places where we can start to express human values in how we research and how we develop society. When we think of the role that universities play in innovation, we have to consider the broader impacts that universities have. Right? We have to think about the impact of creating just a scientifically literate society, not just driving science tools and innovations. It's also important to think about how to actually get people involved in the greater civil functions of society, whether that's Indigenous people, whether that's rural, we'll say country bumpkins like my mom, who will call herself that. She often doesn't see herself in the work that I do, even though it's really, I hope that is impacting the environment. And, I want to spend 1 second about thinking about how we create innovation and how we drive maybe our goals for innovation, right? We think the function that we should be providing is improving the world, making things a little bit better. But what that means is really different to a lot of people, right? We can think about an Indigenous perspective of what makes the world better. Right? We can think of the history of Indigenous people. Let's think, oh my God, it's a history of displacement, not only from landscapes across Canada, but also from the civic responsibilities, the civic authority that you might have. Or we can, just think of it a little bit more pragmatic or conventional, so what actually matters to a lot of people. And it's usually some mix of one health metrics. It could be, the well-being of humans, the well-being of your environment, the well-being of animals in this system. And it's a mix. Everybody has a complex mix of all these indicators that allow them to kind of envision that future that's really good for them. So, maybe stepping out of the ivory teepee to really kind of think about what that drives in terms of my research project. As a pollination ecologist, I work primarily with bees, to some extent because I hate dealing with humans, but also because I think the question is somewhat easier to ask how I'm benefiting the world. A lot of my work is basically how do I valorize the function of bee species in a landscape? How do I put value on all that? You can say, oh, it's pretty easy, Kyle, right? We can think about their contributions to pollination. Oh, they drive food security. Oh, they create industry with their products, whether that be honey, pollen, propolis, things like that. That's great. But there's some garbage bees out there too. There's bees that don't do anything in the landscape. They're bad pollinators. They don't provide honey. They don't do anything for humans. Or maybe they have some function with maintaining, the natural ecosystem, those relationships. But it's really hard to think about what they do. If you're potentially creative enough, you can maybe think of them in a way to say, oh, maybe they drive future evolutionary relationships. They'll drive the future of what our systems look like long after humans are gone. Maybe that's the value that we can think about. But it's really hard to make that sound important to do. It's almost depressing to some extent. And the work that we try to do in terms of our research with science, whether that be entomology, whether that be agriculture, is also focused on understanding why people want to be involved in science and what they can get out of it. When it comes to work with Indigenous communities, it's making sure that we drive research processes that actually allow them to express their values, the values that they have about the environment, the values that they might have about politics or the economy onto those systems. It's making sure that we're doing conservation or agricultural development in a way that meets the standards of Indigenous communities and their knowledge systems. Our work with farmers when it comes to a SHRC-NSERC Sustainable Agricultural Research Initiative involves not only thinking about how to make agriculture more sustainable, but to understand what farmers themselves see as being sustainable. We have farmers that have all sorts of potential issues with, mental health, with HR recruitment, with being able to actually utilize any of our innovation. They also have a problem with the greater world not recognizing the fact that they've been at the forefront of making sure that their industry is as ecologically responsible as possible. But they actually don't often get a pat on the shoulder or this kind of respect that we give somebody like an ecologist or a climate scientist. Right? These people are at the ground floor in a lot of these spaces. And I think it's in these spaces that we're succeeding at least at the University of Manitoba and our faculty, where we're transforming that work. We're making sure that our tenure and promotion guidelines reflect those values, reflect the change that we're providing. We're expanding the boundaries and expanding the boxes that we allow people to innovate in their own disciplines. Thank you, miigwech, everybody.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Gina Ogilvie, and I'm a physician, a professor, and a Canada Research Chair at the University of British Columbia. I'm just delighted to be invited here by the Walrus and Universities Canada to share my perspectives on research and innovation in Canada. As a clinician scientist, daughter, mother, wife, cousin, friend, and of course patient, what I will say is this: research is healthcare. The care you or your family or friends received yesterday, last year, last decade, even in the last century, is research. Healthcare is the end product of research, and every Canadian and every person globally benefits. And I can assure you that some team, last month, last year, did unheralded and unsung work that provided your clinician and you with the evidence base so they could optimally direct your care. And they are working on that right now to provide you with the best care for tomorrow. I was drawn to research early in my career in medical school, and particularly to women's health. It was very apparent to me that if we wanted to improve the health of the world, the most effective and efficient way to do that was to make sure women were healthy and living their best lives. Because not only did the women, for their own dignity and humanity, deserve to be healthy, but it was clear from all the evidence that if you keep a woman healthy, her children, her spouse, her family, and her community all benefited and were themselves kept healthy, educated, and thriving, making women's health one of the most cost-effective investments we can make. Working in an impoverished community in the north end of Hamilton after graduating medical school illustrated in stark and unrelenting relief the inequities that women faced in terms of healthcare, particularly in the area of prevention. I saw firsthand how women would bring family members, parents, children in for care, but did not have time for themselves. And I saw particularly how many women would avoid the then yearly cervical cancer prevention tool, Pap smears, in particular, despite their preventive benefit. They didn't have time to come in every year to do a Pap smear. It was complicated to arrange their work schedule, childcare, transport, and the Pap smear, because it couldn't be taken during their periods, added a uniquely female wrinkle to planning. And many, frankly, just didn't want to undergo the pelvic examination that was needed to conduct the Pap smear. It was too traumatizing, particularly for those who were sexual assault survivors. So based on very legitimate concerns and realities, women were not engaging in a critical cancer prevention opportunity. And I also knew that while Pap smears were useful, their accuracy was, in fact, limited. And how we addressed the diagnostic limitations of Pap smears was by repeating them frequently, in hopes that the Pap smear, the next year's Pap smear, would catch it if we missed it this year. So this was a problem that needed solving. Cervical cancer is a preventable cancer with a long natural history, permitting ample time to detect and treat precancer. And while now there's a vaccine, it's a preventive vaccine. And so for the many hundreds of millions of women who've never been vaccinated, they deserve a better screening experience. We urgently needed a better screening tool, a tool that was more accurate, a tool that was more acceptable. And so this is where research shifted the landscape. First off, our basic science colleagues, our brilliant, vital colleagues who are the unsung heroes who explore the biological underpinnings of disease and help provide us with a blueprint for clinical care, determined that cervical cancer was caused by the human papillomavirus. And that knowledge catapulted the field forward and allowed the clinician scientists like me to get to work. We all mused, would detecting HPV in women, could we prevent cervical precancer better than with Pap smears? By this time, I'd moved out west to British Columbia, and so our multidisciplinary team of OB-GYNs, cancer, family physicians, infectious disease, lab medicine specialists, among all others, recognized that here in Canada and in BC, we were uniquely poised and right-sized to answer the question. We had the expertise, the population, the healthcare system, the academic system, and the infrastructure. And that allowed us to lead a world-class trial in British Columbia to answer the question. And while other settings, the UK and Italy in particular, were embarking on trials of HPV and Pap versus Pap smears, they had much more complicated and convoluted design due to their healthcare systems. And if you know about clinical trials, simpler is better. And we were able to do the simple and straightforward trial. So in 2006, we applied to CIHR and received funding to lead the landmark HPV focal trial to answer the following question. Was HPV testing better than Pap smears for detecting cervical precancer and ultimately preventing cervical cancer? Between 2008 and 2012, our team recruited over 25,000 women through family physicians and primary care centers in the lower mainland of British Columbia. And we randomized each and every one of those women to receive either HPV testing or Pap smears for cervical screening to answer that question. We followed these women initially for 4 years to 2016 to address the primary trial outcome, but we've continued to follow them now up to 2 decades. And yes, just a reminder, 2008 is almost 2 decades, just for folks here. And we're going to continue examining the ongoing benefits of HPV-based screening. Our findings, which were published in 2018, were clear and unambiguous. HPV primary testing for cervical screening offered vastly improved protection against cervical precancers compared to Pap smears. And if a woman was HPV negative, she was highly unlikely to develop cervical precancer. At first, we had for the first 4 years, but now we know for at least the next 10 years. We demonstrated that screening with HPV every 4 to 5 years was safer and more effective than Pap screening every 2 years. We also did research that leveraged another critical aspect of HPV. Now, unlike Pap screening, where we needed to visualize the cervix in order to take the specimen, we can test vaginal samples with HPV, and we don't need to sample from the cervix. And women can collect the samples themselves. They do not need to undergo a pelvic exam. So now there's no need for women to go to a clinic, more or less undergo a pelvic exam to accurately be screened for cervical cancer. And the work continues. As a researcher, I'm exceedingly grateful for the public investment, and we take our responsibility to steward those dollars carefully. We're now examining the impact of HPV testing 2 years out, and we're looking to see if, given the improved accuracy of HPV testing, whether a woman who received HPV testing at 50 and 55 can actually exit screening earlier because of the remarkably improved accuracy, once again offering women better health care, healthier lives, and saving healthcare costs. So back to the challenge laid out for us to answer. How is Canadian research important to the average Canadian? Well, actually, let's start globally. HPV testing is now recommended instead of Pap screening for cervical cancer prevention globally by the WHO, by PAHO, by the European Union, Australia, the US. And the HPV focal trial has been foundational in those recommendations. In Canada, the Canadian Partnership Against Cancer, SOGC, Gynae Oncologists of Canada, and other expert screening and cancer bodies have all recommended the move from Pap smears to HPV testing. And Canadian provinces like British Columbia, Ontario, Quebec, and PEI have already moved to from Pap screening to HPV testing, and most provinces are en route to making this transformative change in one of their largest screening program and embedding self-collection as part of that option. So every female in Canada will be directly impacted by this study as cervix screening is transformed, and every Canadian will benefit as they improve the health and well-being of the women in their lives. Our HPV focal study, our Canadian study, our study funded by CIHR is one of only 4 studies worldwide that provided the highest level of evidence to justify this transition. So this Canadian research is impacting the lives of every woman, not only in Canada, but around the world. And as this example has shown, by building off the critical work of our unsung heroes, those brilliant creative basic scientists who provide the basis for our work, and moving through the channels of scientists, practitioners, and patient advocates, Canadian research is impacting the lives of Canadians and people globally on a daily basis and in a real and tangible way. Thank you.
Good evening. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Burch. I'm a professor at the University of Waterloo. I hold a Canada Research Chair in Sustainability Governance and Innovation there. And for the last few years, I've also been serving as the Executive Director of the Waterloo Climate Institute. My sincere thanks to the Walrus and to Universities Canada for the invitation to speak this evening. I'm honored. My goal with our very short time together is to explore what I think are the remarkable ways that both the natural and the social sciences shape our understanding of what's changing around us so rapidly and what the future could look like. I'd like us to take a moment to reflect on what our role could be, or even should be, responding to the overwhelming challenge of global climate change with imagination, with inclusivity, and with insight. First, to set the stage a little bit, a word on what climate change is not. It is not a distant problem. It's not affecting other people who are not us. It's not affecting some other place that's not here. Here in Canada, it's become overwhelmingly clear that a cooler climate and robust resources such that we have won't allow us to escape unscathed. The wildfires of 2024 set records, and not in a good way. We racked up over $8 billion in insured losses, which was triple the record set just the year prior, and 12 times the average insured losses from 2001 to 2010. This is a curve that we don't want to be on. And the costs of doing not enough to tackle the root causes of climate change are becoming clear. It's also not simply an environmental challenge or purely a technical problem, while of course it is this as well. Climate change is a deeply human problem, and it doesn't affect us all equally. It directly impacts our ability to raise our children, to produce food, to work, to play, to flourish in our communities. It turns out that we actually have already most of the technologies that we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions at least by half. Which means that we need social scientists, economists, sociologists, political scientists, and others to help reveal why we can't seem to move faster, to choose between the solutions that each come with benefits and trade-offs, and to critically engage more deeply with communities to explore what matters to them. University-based climate change scientists and social scientists such as myself are shaping the way that the world responds to both the escalating consequences of climate change, like floods and wildfires and drought, as well as its causes, moving away from burning fossil fuels to limit the amount of greenhouse gases that we pump into the atmosphere. One way our work directly connects to tangible improvements with our communities is a bit opaque, but bear with me, I'll take you through it. So as we just saw in Belém in Brazil, you may have seen in the news, countries from around the world convened to try to agree on how fast to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, who should pay, of course, and how we protect communities through adaptation. This is a fraught and deeply political process, and it needs to be informed by the best available science. This is the job of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and the only acronym that I will use tonight. The IPCC is a global team of scientists nominated by their home governments who aim to gather and synthesize the incredible science that's produced all over the world. This isn't a task that any one government, think tank, or university could possibly carry out. It requires scholars with different lived experiences, different skill sets to work together. For many years, I've worked as a lead author with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, contributing my own and others' scholarship on energy transitions, city-scale climate solutions, and governance models that can accelerate progress. But why does this work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change matter so much? Setting aside the remarkable nature of this type of collaboration across geographies, across languages, across disciplines, the work of the IPCC directly informs the Paris Agreement, which is our global climate change treaty. It also trickles down in all sorts of ways to national, regional, and municipal climate change action plans around the world. IPCC reports are a primary input for at least 100 countries' climate change policies and planning processes. They are an essential and foundational reference for virtually all serious national, subnational climate change planning efforts. It's the evidence that a planner in Halifax can point to when they recommend restoring a wetland to protect the coast from storm erosion, or an engineer in Saskatoon can pull out when they propose the city's first large-scale solar farm. Crucially, the scientists who invest years working on an IPCC assessment are not paid or compensated by the United Nations at all. It's our home universities and the federal government here in Canada who invest in the research ecosystem that enables this kind of work. At the other end of the scale, at a much more deeply local scale, our team at the Waterloo Climate Institute, including Dr. Jose Di Bella, Dr. Peter Crank, Simon Glauser, Dr. Susan Elliott, and others, partnered with the Southwestern Public Health Unit of Ontario to conduct an in-depth assessment of climate-related health risks and vulnerabilities in Oxford County, Elgin County, and the city of St. Thomas. The team uncovered a range of health impacts of climate change on local vulnerable populations and proposed a series of recommendations to improve climate resilience in the community. A key message was the need for partnership-led and community-informed tangible actions which can reduce risk and enhance the long-term capacity of vulnerable populations to adapt. So we went on to do just that. We opened a competition among our very excellent students at the University of Waterloo from architecture, engineering, planning, and other disciplines to design a modular and accessible cooling station that also offered a play area for kids, room to grow an edible garden, and escape intensifying heat. So rather than creating additional toolkits or guidance documents, we co-designed a community heat risk reduction solution that is replicable elsewhere. This work wouldn't have been possible without close collaboration among a human geographer and a climatologist and public health practitioners and governance experts, community groups, and students. Which brings me to my concluding thoughts. And I'd like to focus those on a broader reflection on the role of universities in society and the type of scholarship that's so desperately needed given the times that we live in. One of the most endearing and perhaps underappreciated qualities that I see in my colleagues is just simple curiosity. How does something work? Can we peel back the layers of something that sort of seems obvious to us and think deeply about other ways that it could be explained? In science, we have a particular approach to satisfying that curiosity: careful and serious thought, methodological rigor, collaboration, and of course, an openness to being surprised. Transparency around how science is done, how it's funded, and who it serves is a crucial ingredient of accountability and can ultimately build trust. This sort of critical thinking also spills over into how we move through the world as citizens, as leaders, and community members. It helps us confidently question answers that we're being given, from TikTok to the White House, and both understand and value expertise in its very many forms. Given the wicked problems that we're faced with today, from climate change to pandemics, it's essential that our universities, in my view, continue to nurture social as well as technical innovation, from fundamental exploratory research to applied research as well. On the climate front, perhaps what we need most is a new science of amplification, pulling together and methodically testing everything we know about how to spread, how to scale up, how to replicate and deepen the solutions that we know work. Finally, I would suggest that as scientists and scholars, there are a few frequently neglected qualities that require renewed commitment, specific training, and significantly enhanced support. While scientists are often rewarded, as you may know, for being the first, the fastest, the most prolific, the challenges we're grappling with today require a totally different set of capabilities. Climate change represents an enormous web of interconnected challenges. Community-engaged scholarship recognizes that there are diverse ways of knowing and complementary expertise among, for instance, Indigenous knowledge holders, practitioners, scientists, and others. To do this well, though, we need to build trust. We have to enter relationships with humility and develop research with social and environmental good as explicit, targeted outcomes. I'm enormously grateful for the research ecosystem that we've built here in Canada that allows us to ask these tough questions and also builds those connections around the world. It's through those connections that science enriches us all. Thank you.
Thank you to our talkers, Graham Carr, Catalina Lopez-Correa, Rahul Krishnan, André Blais, Kyle Bobiwash, Gina Ogilvie, and Sarah Burch. I'd now like to invite Gabe Miller, the President and CEO of Universities Canada, to come to the stage and share a few words.
Merci beaucoup. Bonsoir. Merci, Jennifer. Before I read my remarks, I just wanted to share something I was thinking about during tonight's session, and the word curiosity sort of crystallized it for me. If you grew up in Ottawa, maybe if you just visited Ottawa, this building really looms large in your memory of the city and what it was like to grow up here. And I remember as a kid, you know, at a time before the internet, at a time before CGI, my parents would say, we're going to go to the museum, and before we could ask, they'd say, yes, the one with the dinosaurs. And that experience sort of embodied what this place was about, because from the outside, it looked like another kind of beautifully designed, quite formal, quite fancy building, but inside was a world that you got exposed to that was beyond anything you really knew existed. And the dinosaurs were, of course, the most extraordinary part of that, but they also had these displays of different parts of the world and natural settings, and you'd see an Inuit family in an Arctic setting, or you'd see Indigenous people on the Alberta plains. And I think the effect of it was you would come back year after year and you would learn and you would discover, but you'd also realize that science and learning about the world is an adventure. And it is full of uncertainty and wildness, and nothing is really settled in terms of how it's going to turn out or even what we know about it. And what I was struck by listening to our presenters tonight and then having the chance to speak with them before was that sense of adventure is what I feel whenever I talk to people who are as passionate as you are about the work you're doing. It's as if you're on a mission, and it's just such a privilege to get to share that mission with you for a few minutes and to learn about the adventure that we're having in our democracy, in our healthcare, in preserving our environment, in all of these areas. So thank you very, very much for sharing your adventure with us, and I'd ask you to join me in thanking them. You know, the partnership between Universities Canada and the Walrus is built on a simple belief. It's that Canada moves forward when we create space for open, thoughtful public discussion. Just last month, Canadian economist Peter Howitt received the Nobel Prize for his work on creative destruction theory. His research makes one thing clear: growth comes from renewal, from new ideas challenging old models and opening space for better ones. Universities Canada is proud to see Canadian research excellence recognized on the world stage with Dr. Howitt's achievement. And through our Global Excellence Initiative, we support other exceptional Canadian researchers working toward the same well-deserved visibility. And many of those researchers are showcased in our reception space this evening. Research excellence is not optional. It's a foundation for security, productivity, and opportunity. That's why we applauded the recognition in our most recent federal budget that Canada's economic future depends on stronger research and talent. Across Canada, researchers and students are building solutions in labs, in communities, and in partnerships that bridge disciplines and sectors. Our job is to make sure they have the support, the stability, and the confidence to keep going. Merci encore at the Walrus. Merci aux conférencières et conférenciers et à toutes les personnes qui ont participé à l'organisation de l'activité. And a special thanks on my behalf to Koko, to Julia, to Kate, and our very dedicated team at Universities Canada. Let's carry this momentum forward and keep celebrating the people and ideas that will move Canada forward. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Gabe. Now I'm going to invite our talkers in the front row to get up and head to the reception. We're going to give them an advanced start while we tell the rest of you a bit more about a few things we have coming up with the Walrus. So if you want to, yeah. Excellent. We'll meet you out there soon. If you enjoyed tonight's event, we have one more coming up this season on Tuesday, December 2nd. Join us online for the Walrus Talks at Home, Aging and Belonging. 4 speakers will share their unique perspectives on how aging shapes identity, connection, and community. Keep an eye in your inbox. You'll receive an email follow-up from the Walrus. The best way to stay in touch with us and find out about future events like this one is to opt into that newsletter. We have recorded this video and we will be posting it online. You can check in at thewalrus.ca/events to watch videos from all our events in the Walrus Talks video room, which is on our website. Subscribe to The Walrus. We have a special offer for those of you in the room, a full year subscription to The Walrus. That's 8 issues delivered to your door for just $25. It's a great deal. We have a table in the lobby with the reception, and the Walrus team is happy to tell you more. What's unique about The Walrus is we're a registered charity, which means we're powered by people like you. And with your support, we can ensure that everyone has access to responsible, fact-based coverage on the very issues that will shape Canada's future. We are paywall-free. Giving Tuesday is coming up, so keep the Walrus in mind. You can donate to the Walrus at thewalrus.ca/support or come by the table in the lobby. All gifts of $20 or more will receive a charitable tax receipt. Thank you to everyone at Universities Canada for making tonight's talks possible. As well, thank you to our annual sponsors, Air Canada, Bullfrog Power, Inspire, RBC, and Rogers. Thank you all for attending in person and online and being part of the Walrus community and this conversation. Have a great evening.